Hi everyone, I'm Leah and welcome back to our podcast, Between the Teeth, the podcast where we put the things that do the killing right between our teeth.
But we don't give them the power to do the killing. I'm Lincoln.
And I'm Taryn. Today we're diving into a book that is probably more heartbreaking than beautiful, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green.
Let's start off by giving you all a little backstory. At its core, this book is just about two teens, Hazel and Augustus, who meet in a cancer support group at church. But it's not the normal happy ending love story. It's a funny but authentic novel that emphasizes love, morality, and finding meaning even with a short life.
Right. Hazel's character is very blunt and honest because she's just a 16-year-old living with terminal cancer. When she meets Gus, her world changes. It becomes a story about connection, not just tragedy.
And John Green is very emotionally truthful in his writing. He makes Hazel and Gus two stars that burn bright but fast, and wants the reader to look at what it means to be remembered.
So grab some tissues, because The Fault in Our Stars is more than just your typical book.
Hey, cancer, shout out to Boozy, I your main bitch.
Let's start with the psychological criticism. I want to focus this section around Nirhada Fithroni's paper, which talks about something called social exchange theory and how it relates to The Fault in Our Stars.
So, I'm going to introduce social exchange theory for everyone who's never heard of it. Social exchange theory is a psychological idea that relationships work kind of like economics. If you give something, you get something. But if the costs start to be more than the benefits, people usually get tired of it. It's not being selfish, it's just what all humans do.
Right, and I think that fits really well with Hazel because she actually says in the beginning that she's a grenade. She thinks that whenever anyone loves her, it's like they're holding something that's going to explode, and she wants to protect them all from that.
Yeah, she doesn't want to get close to anyone because she knows she's close to the end of her life, and she thinks her quick death will hurt anyone who loves her. So I think, sort of in her head, the cost of loving her is too high for anyone else to want to deal with.
Agreed. But then Augustus kind of comes in with a completely different mindset. In a way, he sort of embraces that cost, in my opinion. The moment where he says, I'm in love with you, and I know that love is just a shout into the void, he's basically acknowledging the risk. He knows that it's going to hurt a lot, but he doesn't care.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a huge emotional reward for Hazel. It makes her feel like she's worth loving, even with her cancer. Getting that validation from Gus shifts her whole way of thinking away from being this kind of burden to everyone. She starts to think that she may be allowed to live for herself a little, instead of just managing everyone else's feelings.
Yeah, but I don't think it's just a one-sided issue, because Augustus isn't just an unbothered, confident guy who saves Hazel. He has his own insecurities too, especially about his meaning in life. He's scared of being forgotten, and he says that directly. For him, he cares about being significant. So what does Hazel do for him? She makes him feel remembered. Not in like a big, crazy, heroic way or anything, but just in a real human way.
Yeah, and that's a huge help to his emotional state because Hazel helps him rethink about what his legacy even means. He thought he had to be some sort of hero to the world, but by the end of the book, he realizes that showing true love and being loved back is its own significant mark on the world.
There's also the way their bond is kind of built through the trauma that they've both experienced throughout their lives. When you go through something so scary, like cancer, especially at a young age, it changes your whole perspective on life. And I think Hazel and Augustus connect so quickly because they skip past all the surface level stuff and have something deeper to talk about.
Like, when they talk in the support group for the first time, they don't even really make small talk. They basically just go straight into deep topics like death and identity. And that's not just about personality, it's also how trauma accelerates feelings of intimacy in people, which is a true psychological pattern.
I think we should also talk about how humor plays a role in their relationship. Their sarcasm and dark jokes are funny, but they're also coping mechanisms. Humor sort of acts like a shield, or a way to distance their emotions from such painful things such as cancer, which is hard to process.
Yeah, totally, and that's another defense mechanism, another psychological concept we learned about. Freud always talked about things like denial, repression, and projection. And I would say Hazel and Augustus lean into humor and irony to avoid always having this constant fear or grief. It's kind of how they stay sane.
Yeah, I saw that a lot, especially when Augustus starts getting worse near the end. Like, the part of the book at the gas station was pretty heartbreaking because he was in a lot of panic and distress. And I would also say he was pretty humiliated. And Hazel was the only one he could call. That scene gets rid of all of Augustus's toughness, and we get to see him in a different lens and as someone who's scared to lose control.
I think the most powerful part of this concept is that Hazel doesn't run away in that moment. When we were talking about like the cost of love earlier, this was when that cost was the highest. She had to watch him suffer, but still chose to be there and stick with him. She got to repay Gus for all the love and bravery he showed her throughout the book.
So when we step back and look at their relationship as a whole, it's getting pretty clear that it was never about just avoiding pain. It was more about making the pain worth it in the little time that they had left. So social exchange theory helped us understand how these two characters calculated emotional risks and still made the choices they did anyway.
Yeah, I think that's what makes their love story so unique from most of the other books I've read, because it's not just based on fantasies or cliches, and it's more about real emotional psychology, especially about fear, vulnerability, courage, and connection.
Yeah, it's very authentic and honest. It shows how people are still able to seek love when they are literally facing death. And they can still try to make sense of the meaning of life with each other.
In the end, Hazel and Augustus don't just fall in love. They transform each other's personalities, and that transformation is what makes the emotional rewards of their relationship worth all the costs.
So now we can sort of shift gears and look at the book through a biographical lens, which basically means we're asking, how did the author John Green's life experiences and environment have an impact on how he wrote The Fault in Our Stars?
I would say the short answer is just a lot, because I think it's really important to point out that John Green didn't just imagine what it would be like to know someone who's dying of cancer and then write about it, but he actually experienced it in his own life. So you guys know that before he became a full-time writer, he worked as a chaplain at a children's hospital?
Only until very recently. I bet that job exposed him to a lot of real kids who were dealing with terminal illnesses, and he got to see how much of an emotional toll it took on them and their families especially. He talked a lot about how that experience changed him forever, and it made him want to write stories that didn't just reduce sick kids to the stereotypes that we always see. And he wanted to portray them as full, complex humans, just like us.
That honesty is super visible when we look at Hazel and Augustus's characters. They're not like the perfect sick heroes. They're funny and emotional, but they're also thoughtful. I thought it was pretty easy to tell that John Green didn't just research this. He drew inspiration from living alongside it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great introduction to another huge talking point, Esther Earl, because she was such a huge influence on the book. So Esther was a teenage girl who had cancer, and she was also a huge fan of John Green, and he actually got to meet her through a lot of online communities, and they became friends and stayed in touch until she passed away in 2010.
So Hazel isn't completely based on Esther because John Green said he didn't want to make her life into fiction. But the emotional tone of Hazel, like her spirit, her voice, and her mixture of strength and vulnerability, was definitely inspired by Esther.
That's something I could really feel based on how Hazel narrates through the book. She's always aware of her mortality, but she's also super funny and self-aware. Like at the beginning, she mocks the support group, questions everything, and she doesn't want to be treated like someone who's already dead, which was kind of the perspective that Esther had too.
Yeah, another interesting fact is that after Esther passed, John Green helped her family publish a book of all of her writings and journals, and they called it "This Star Won't Go Out." And that title by itself, I think, shows me how much he cared about her and how much she inspired him.
Okay, well, aside from just the illness perspective, John Green also put a lot of his love of literature, philosophy, and metaphors into this story, which is a reflection of his own background in life.
I mean, yeah, he studied English and religion at Kenyon College, which I could definitely feel in the book because there were lots of references to big questions like what it means to live a meaningful life or how he makes sense of suffering.
I thought it was cool how those questions weren't only being asked by the book characters, because John Green was also asking those questions throughout how he structured the book himself. And I noticed this specifically with Hazel's favorite book in The Fault in Our Stars, which was An Imperial Affliction. And that book sort of mirrored Hazel's obsession with answers and closure.
Yeah, it's a little dramatic, but that's what makes the story so real. With the cigarette, Augustus is basically trying to have some control over his life, which he doesn't have too much of. That kind of thinking when writing a story comes from someone who suffered through a lot themselves.
That's so true. And one thing people don't always talk about is John Green's own mental health. Even though he's spoken honestly about his anxiety and obsessive thinking before, and when you look at Hazel's world, like the way she overanalyzes and questions everything, you can see some of that.
Totally, and it's almost like Hazel's a voice for his own problems, and she really shows how much of an author can be embedded into a character.
Wow, when we read this book through a biographical lens, it becomes so much more powerful. It's not just a story Green wrote, it's one he felt in his own life. It's a story shaped by his own love, fears, and questions.
Yeah, it's not just fiction, but it's a tribute to Esther, the kids he met at the hospital, and anyone who's ever tried to live a good life while knowing the time they have left is short.
And maybe that's why it doesn't feel like a normal cancer book, because it's really a true book about human connection, purpose, and love, which are all huge parts of the life of the person who wrote it. Alright, now, let's explore The Fault in Our Stars through a historical lens, which means that we're going to look at the time it was written in and what was happening around the world that could have influenced the book in any way.
So John Green published the book in 2012, which was a pretty significant time politically and socially, especially in the United States, because a lot of people were having debates over healthcare, which was very connected to The Fault in Our Stars, and one of the main things people fought over was the Affordable Care Act, or as we know it, Obamacare.
Yeah, Obamacare was passed in 2010, but people were still arguing about it across the country in 2012. The law was supposed to make healthcare more affordable and accessible for people with pre-existing conditions. Similarly, Hazel and Augustus both have serious pre-existing conditions.
Even though The Fault in Our Stars never specifically talks about health insurance or money, it's still totally shaped by those real-world problems. Just think about it. Hazel is on oxygen 24/7, and Augustus has an amputated leg. Both of them go to appointments and get prescriptions and scans, which is incredibly expensive.
Exactly. But the book doesn't make it about money, it makes it about meaning. And that's the kind of point of using a historical lens, because even when something isn't addressed specifically, we can still feel its importance based on the world that it's written in.
I usually think about the scene where Augustus uses his genie wish to take Hazel to Amsterdam, because it's so powerful to me. That wish was really valuable because getting to do something special like traveling or meeting a celebrity author isn't a normal option for kids with cancer. It's more of a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it really emphasizes just how much illnesses like cancer can limit people's lives, not just physically, but financially and socially. Even the fact that Hazel's mom has to spend all of her time getting a master's degree in social work so she can care for Hazel shows how lots of parents have to become full-time caregivers because that's literally the only option. We can tie that into the social structures of the book too, like how illness can reshape family roles or how financial limits and caregiving expectations fall unfairly on women. The book shows how the systems around healthcare and work can affect personal lives in big ways.
Now, I want to talk about how that relates to another sort of theme in history, the growth in public awareness about chronic illness and disability. During the time the book came out, there was a huge cultural shift because I think more people were starting to talk about mental health and long-term care and patient experiences, so I think this book sort of added to that cultural momentum.
Another big part of that was how big social media was getting to. By 2012, apps like YouTube were getting so popular, and John Green was already big in that because of his Vlogbrothers channel with his brother Hank. Doing that gave him a cool connection with his audience, which was mostly teens, and lots of them probably felt unseen by media.
That relationship between John Green and his fans created a whole community of readers who could actually talk about the book with each other. Being able to post quotes, write fan fiction, and share photos of their favorite pages made the book become a big part of a cultural movement.
Yeah, I really think that shows how young adult literature was evolving in 2012, because before then, there were already kind of popular things like The Hunger Games and Twilight, but those were more like fantasy and less reality, and I think The Fault in Our Stars sort of helped create a wave of realistic fiction and honest books that deal with sensitive topics like illness and death.
Yeah, books like this gave permission, in a way, for teenage literature to go into sad and messy themes. And I like that it didn't try to sugarcoat anything, because the fact that he left some questions unanswered in the book really showed the message of this cultural shift.
People were living in a world after the Great Recession where they questioned things like healthcare, government, and religion. When Hazel gets to fly to meet Van Houten, the author of An Imperial Affliction, the book from the book, she is super disappointed in him, which is a metaphor for disillusionment during that time, especially with teens, because it shows that adults don't always have the answers that we really think they do.
Right? So The Fault in Our Stars isn't just about illness, but also what it means to grow up in a world that feels kind of unstable, which is what a lot of teens felt around 2012.
Isn't he, or do all of us feel that way?
For sure. That's why this book is still so fire, because even if things in government and society change, all the bigger questions about mortality and human connection are always going to be relevant to us.
So when we apply the historical lens to The Fault in Our Stars, it shows how it's both relevant to the time period it was written in, but timeless also in the sense that it talks about universal questions. Okay, before we finish, let's compare some things. How do you guys think The Fault in Our Stars is similar or even different to books with similar themes?
Yeah, I remember reading A Walk to Remember by Nicholas Sparks, which is similar because they both involve teen love, terminal illness, and the idea of wanting to leave a mark on the world before it's too late. But A Walk to Remember is way too dramatic and emotional, and I think John Green tries to make his characters feel like real teenagers.
One time I read 5 Feet Apart, which the movie is great too, where 2 young people with crazy illnesses fall in love, but they can't be close to each other because they have cystic fibrosis. That story is more about emotional connection with physical boundaries, and The Fault in Our Stars is more about internal change.
Yeah, I've heard about both of those books, and I also watched 5 Feet Apart, and I like the movie too. And I think they're super moving, but The Fault in Our Stars is still my favorite because of how it balances pain with real humor. Like, Augustus and Hazel are pretty funny, and they mess up, and they're sarcastic.
Also, the whole idea of an imperial affliction is a whole other layer that most books don't have. Hazel is so obsessed with that book, which is supposed to parallel our obsession with this book.
That makes a lot of sense, and I bet that's why the book gets recommended by teachers and so many other people, because it creates so many good conversations between the readers.
Speaking of recommendations, I definitely say everyone our age should read it.
I mean, I give it a 5 out of 5 on lit cigarettes.
I'm going with a 5 out of 5 oxygen tanks. Actually, 4.9. I wish there was more of them together because I wasn't ready to see them die.
Same. 5 imperial afflictions for me. I think it changed how I see terminal illness a lot.
Okay, it's time for trivia.
My first question is, what's the name of the support group Hazel attends?
Animal Cracker University.
Okay.
No one knows the answer. Alright, my question is, what's the name of Hazel's favorite author?
Peter Van Houten.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Last one. What did Hazel say when she first saw Augustus's cigarette?
Oh no. I don't know.
I don't remember. What did she say?
Okay, wait, I'm not looking at the script. And there's no answer on the script actually. But she says, you just ruined this whole thing. Like, that's not verbatim, but like,
Right.
she says, like, at the end, she's like, you just ruined this whole thing. He's like, the whole thing? She's like, this whole thing.
I agree.
That's it.
Okay.
All right.
Nice.
Okay, so, final thoughts?
I think what makes The Fault in Our Stars so cool is that it doesn't pretend that love can fix everything, which is what a lot of books do that I read. But it shows how much love can matter anyways.
Yeah, and I love how authentic and honest it was. Like, it's not all Hollywood, it's about finding meaning in everything.
It also proves that young adult literature can be for everyone because all the questions the book asks about grief and purpose are real questions that everyone has a hard time with.
Yeah, I think that's really why we chose it for our project. Because at first I thought it would just be a love story, which I'm not really into.
Don't lie.
But when I read it more, I realized that it's more about what it means to love while you're basically dying, which was kind of cool to me.
All right, well, thanks for joining us
Between
on
the Teeth.
Between the Teeth.
Between the teeth.
Yep, we hope everyone finishes watching this podcast and sees Hazel and Augustus' story as brave and beautiful instead of tragic.
We'll be back next time with a new story and plenty of new lenses.
But until then,
Goodbye from Between the Teeth!
Cancer!
Shout out to Boosie!
Oh my god.